friends. Welcome to the Intel Report. I'm Scott Horton filling in. He got in an argument with his motorcycle and the motorcycle won, so he is still on vacation, taking it easy. And I'm Scott Horton filling in for him. I am the host of the Weekend Interview Show here on the Republic Broadcasting Network every Saturday from 3 to 5 Texas time. I'm also an assistant editor at antiwar.com. I write for them, antiwar.com/Horton. And my website is weekendinterviewshow.com. I keep all the archives of my interviews up there for you in MP3 format. Soon to be including the following interview with J.D. Cash, reporter from the McCurtain Daily Gazette. My favorite kind of government employee is the kind that rats on their bosses. And apparently there have been some government employees ratting on their bosses to J.D. Cash lately. Welcome to the show, Mr. Cash.
Well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and your listeners.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to have you here, sir. Who are these government employees, not necessarily by name, if you can't name them, but who are they, who do they work for, and what are they leaking to you?
It took a number of years. You know, we started out getting information from the Oklahoma City Police Department people. Then I started getting some information from the Sheriff's Department people from Oklahoma County. Then I started getting some information from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, which is the OSBI, is kind of our little equivalent of it's a state police force. Then I started getting information from some FBI agents, and about as fast as they tell me something, they lose their job. And so then that sort of dried up for a while. And now I'm getting some information from people that I've agreed to call Department of Justice officials. Some have worked at the highest levels in the Justice Department that have contacted me either individually or through a representative to try to help me to understand the parameters of the disaster. And I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend to. This is a giant jigsaw puzzle that still has some pieces left to be filled in.
Well, and there's no better man to be attempting to put the puzzle pieces together than you. You've been writing about this Oklahoma bombing story and the true story, as best you can tell, for the last 10 years, haven't you?
I think our first story was 10 days or so after the event. And that first story won an award from the Society of Professional Journalists for investigative reporting, and I thought, well, that's a good sign that we're on to something. Anyway, we started out that way, and over the years, I've picked up a really great partner in Roger Charles. Roger met me when he was working for 2020, and he produced the piece, The Victims Want to Know, and what it was a piece in January of 96 January 97, about the evidence, the overwhelming evidence of prior knowledge on the part of the authorities. They had a sting operation that just got out of control, and the bad boys got through. And that was how we met. And then we worked on the Carol House story together, the great informant that I found in February of 90. Actually, I found her in December, or actually November, I guess, of 96. I found her, made contact with her in December of 96, and then she told me her story in early January of 97.
Have you had anyone else really in the media try to contact you and catch up with your notes? And
Oh, sure. Oh, God, yes. I have been a part of 9 or 10 documentaries. I've worked with almost every major...
Well, hold it right there, Mr. Cash. We got to take this break. We'll be right back. It's the Intel Report.
For Real Talk Radio, you're listening to the National Intel Report with your host, John Stadtmiller.
Hey, everybody, I'm Scott Horton, host of the Weekend Interview Show here on Republic, filling in for John Stadtmiller, who's getting over some motorcycle injuries, but he's all right. He'll be well soon. And we're talking with J.D. Cash. He's a reporter from the McCurtain Daily Gazette, McCurtain.com. That's McCurtain.com. And for 10 years now, he has been following the truth as best he can tell of the Oklahoma City bombing, which tends to be a far cry from the official story that a couple of doofuses did this themselves and got away with it.
You know, nobody believed that at first, and for good reason. And, you know, and the more, Scott, we learn about terrorism, the more we know that the Oklahoma City thing is impossible.
Well, I have to tell you, I was in high school last semester, senior year of high school, when the Oklahoma bombing happened, and I went over to a friend's house that day, and he had a friend over, a different friend over, who was in the Force Recon, Special Forces in the Marine Corps in Vietnam, and I had already known this guy, and he was very definitely who he claimed to be. And he took one look at that building and went, oh, okay, there had to have been an explosion here, and here, and there's no way that a truck bomb did that by itself. And that was the very first day of the Oklahoma bombing. It's taking one look at it and saying, and the news is saying, yeah, a car bomb outside. And this guy just started laughing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there were multiple explosions. There was one heck of an explosion inside that building. Whether or not we'll ever know more about that, the evidence is all buried. They were very careful to announce that they buried all that building, and they buried it in Oklahoma City along with body parts, so that it is officially a grave, and you would have to have all 168 families sign off to have any excavation done to find the C4 burns, Semtex burns.
Now that's thinking ahead.
Residue, and it's not going to. So that's not going to happen. So we're stuck now with doing. I think what's really important is let's just go ahead and bust the rest of the guys that were involved, and let's put them on a slab and inject them after they've had their fair trial and all their appeals have expired.
Very well. That sounds good to me. Now, because we're limited on time here, I'm going to try to hold you through the rest of the hour, but. Let me see if I can try to give a quick synopsis of what I think it is that you found. There's a neo-Nazi ring, or former neo-Nazi ring, based out of Elohim City, a little, I guess, white trash version of the Davidian compound out there in eastern Oklahoma.
Right.
And these guys were the Aryan Republican Army bank robbery ring of the early 1990s. And tied to Timothy McVeigh.
And Terry Nichols, no question about it. They were both involved in casing and robbing banks with these guys.
Okay, now my best understanding of Elohim City comes from the book Secret Life of Bill Clinton by Evans Ambrose Pritchard, which
Ambrose has it. He went out there with me, and he's a sharp guy. And
it's actually been quite a few years since I've read this book, but if I remember right, he says in there that you went around driving the old pickup truck and drinking whiskey with a former Klansman named Dennis Mahon, and that Dennis Mahon admitted to you that he was the guy that built the bomb. Is that right?
What he said is that he told them, he showed them how to build an ANFO bomb. He had built a 500-pounder and blown up a vehicle with it himself. Now, was he the bomb builder? I doubt it. I think that I think there's a couple of guys out in Arizona that were directly linked to McVeigh that have years of experience, a long history in
what are their names?
One of them they busted right after, on May the 12th, they busted him. I think he was an informant. It's an old trick, you know, you bust your informants in broad daylight, and then you announce he had nothing to do with it. And then another guy, they went ahead and locked him up for quite a while. He was messed up on meth. He was a miner. He worked up in some mines up in Bullhead City. Outside of Bullhead City in Horton, Arizona. And he's the guy who knew how to do the timing sequence to actually do a directed blast.
And what are these men's names?
Well, we haven't written about them.
Oh, I see.
And we'll probably save those two guys very likely for the book.
Okay. Now,
this is a book that we've been working on for quite some time. We're releasing some stuff now because I think that the atmosphere is right, that we actually are going to get a congressional investigation, and I think we're going to get the Department of Justice in such a bind they're going to have to make additional arrests.
Well, that would be a first if there was a congressional investigation.
Yeah, there's never been. They'll investigate anything but they won't investigate the Oklahoma City bombing. I don't think people realize this.
Yeah, I think we might even take a little bit of time out to emphasize that point because, since September 11th, we've all been a bit desensitized, and the Oklahoma bombing doesn't seem as big of a deal
now. It's no
now.
longer the world's record.
Yeah, but at the time it was the biggest crime since Wounded Knee. This is the biggest news ever. They passed a bunch of laws, and there's the entire country had a terrible emotional reaction. This was the biggest deal ever. And yet,
all the babies that were murdered and all that stuff.
Sure. Not one congressional committee in the House or the Senate, under the control of the Republicans, by the way, when Bill Clinton was in power, they didn't hold a single hearing, not even behind closed doors.
I wonder why.
Was it there was something they didn't want to know?
I think that they knew way more than what they wanted to. I think they were implicated in the sting. I think that there were several people, including members of the Oklahoma delegation, that had been briefed, Republicans and Democrats.
Right. Didn't one of the congressional Republican congressmen in the House, didn't he admit at the scene that he was warned? I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Congressman Istuk admitted to some reserve deputies, right?
He was talking about it, that he'd been briefed ahead of time about that there was a threat on the building and they were going to make some arrests,
Right.
And then when he was confronted with this at a news conference, he denied it all.
Right.
But we're now we're re-looking into this area again, and I mean right now we're looking at this area for a future story on the sting operation. We're now turning our attention. We're going to have one more story where we're going to list who one member of the conspiracy said he was willing to give up in trade for a lighter sentence. And so he provides names of the people he's willing to give up. And then we have some documentation from his attorney that there was a deal in the works. And we have a documentation from the Department of Justice that there was a deal in the works. The deal fell through because this idiot wanted 5 years. And he was looking at a life plus 30 sentence. So that was just too far apart. And then I think that they thought the high-ups at the Justice Department said, well, no, if you reveal the Elohim City guys, then you reveal our informant operation, and we're back to where we were. We're screwed.
Right, and really that's the key to this thing is how many people at Elohim City were working for the government and which agencies and to what degree of coordination.
Well, we certainly know that the German government was in on this because we all know that Andy Strassmeyer was still a lieutenant in Bundeswehr at the time of the bombing. He's still being paid by those people. He's been in this country since '88 with diplomatic immunity status. Okay,
so Andre Strassmeyer was still working for the German army at the time that he was in the country.
Absolutely. Then you have this guy that we've just written about who I think is working for Morris Dees. And I think that his boss, Kirk Lyons, is also working for Morris Dees. And not happily either. I'm sure these guys have been wrapped across the balls by the IRS and the FBI, and they were facing a jail term. That's the only reason that they ever would have agreed to be informants in this capacity. So
Kirk Lyons, the famous neo-Nazi lawyer, is working for the...
Yeah, wouldn't that be perfect to have him ratting out his own clients?
Oh, I love it.
Now, wouldn't it be perfect for him to purposely screw up the Branch Davidian case? Remember, he was one of the attorneys.
Oh.
Is this not the perfect deal? This is an ingenious deal. Of course, it's just a real shame that all these people got killed. They weren't even smart enough to figure it out, to do it right. Or they double-crossed their handlers and saw to it the building got bombed. I don't know. That's for them to explain someday to a grand jury and during a trial.
Well, we know that the local police were there at, 7 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, they were there. They were there all night. They were there. My cousin in Oklahoma City, I find out later, my own cousin was the dispatcher at the fire department. He was warned on the Friday before. He got a call from the OSBI saying, hey, you guys need to be ready. We've got some terrorists coming to town next week. Everybody needs to be on go.
Okay, so when Carol Howe, who was the ATF informant at Elohim City, when she's reporting, I believe I remember her handler's name was Angela Finley, and she had reported all of this stuff to the ATF.
She told them on their first debriefing in September, she said, here's the deal. Just read the first chapter of the Turner Diaries and you'll know exactly what's going to happen. So she gave them everything. She said also the key date's April 19th, the anniversary of Waco. Then she later learned that they were casing federal buildings. She went in there and said they're going to bomb, probably going to bomb the federal building in Oklahoma City. Could even be the courthouse in Oklahoma City. Could even be the IRS building in Oklahoma City. And they also have taken a look at the federal building in Tulsa.
Well, so
I mean, how much more do you need to give them?
Well, if this guy Andre Strassmeyer is working for the German government, he must have also been working for the FBI or the CIA or something
this
too,
right?
right?
This is the new information that I've received, which was and this is from the Department of Justice, and I think that there's some validity to this, that they were getting their information, the FBI was getting their information on a back channel from the German government. So Andy would report it to the German government. I don't know how he's doing it, going down there to the corner and making a phone call. I don't know. And then they would then, whenever, pass it along to the FBI.
Interesting. And at the same time, the ATF has their own independent investigation.
Their own operation going.
Right. And this is.
And then the FBI gets mad and tries to kick them out. It's just a nightmare.
Right. And this is Andy the German that McVeigh called right after renting the truck. We'll be right back. We're talking with J.D. Cash. My friends, welcome back to the show. It's John Statmiller's Intel Report. I'm Scott Horton filling in for him. I'm the host of the Weekend Interview Show here on Republic every Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m. at Texas time. And I'm talking with J.D. Cash from the McCurtain County Gazette. And he is probably the single best source in America for the story behind the Oklahoma City bombing, the one that our government has and media have been lying to us about for an entire decade. And there's a few different places we can go here, but I think we should start with basically what got this all back in the news, Mr. Cash, is a guy named Jesse Trentadue is suing the U.S. government, and a bunch of documents got released somehow. What's going on there?
Well, what happened was, as a FBI agent who's now retired, turned over a document that he obtained as part of this one of the world's largest data dumps, one of the largest FOIA responses in history. And it is very clear that somebody inside the Bureau wanted this guy, who was a well-known whistleblower, to have this particular document. It had nothing to do with his FOIA. And buried in this hard drive was this, where he had scanned all this stuff, was this one 4-page memo, teletype from Louis Freeh, dated January 4, 1996, it is somewhat redacted. But in it, he talks about, he says...
This is Louis Freeh, the director of the FBI.
Yeah, this is from the director. And he's telling 7 SACs around the country, none of which are... I can't remember if he even told the Oklahoma City bombing SAC or not. But he's telling these different SACs that Strassmeyer is getting ready to leave the United States through Mexico, that he is staying with Kirk Lyons in Black Mountain, that Andy has had a long relationship with McVeigh, that Andy was the one McVeigh was looking for on April 5th after he checked truck sizes with the Ryder truck place 22nd earlier. And then he says, and we know something, and you can't tell, from an SPLC informant who was at Elgin City on the 17th when Andy called. Well, my guess is that the SPLC informant is Dave Holloway, but we'll wait and see. Because that name is redacted, but his name does fit in that block. It will fit there nicely. And it turns out that Holloway and Missy got a call on the 17th from McVeigh, but he says he was someplace else. And he said he didn't even know the guy was just ranting about Waco, but he was just sure it was McVeigh. And so then you have no effort on the part of the FBI to stop Strassmeyer from leaving the country.
So this guy, Jesse Trenadu, how did he get the document?
So what happens is he finds out, he reads our story, and so he FOIAs it, that document. And the FBI says no such document exists. So he called me up and he said, would you loan me yours? And I said, well, sure. So then he submits it to the court and says, this exists, I just want it unredacted. They have no reason to keep it redacted, the case is closed. And they said, well, they told the U.S. attorney that, who called Jesse, said, well, they're going to go to court and say that that's a phony document. So then he calls an FBI senior manager who's retired from the D.C., the Hoover building, the main one. He used to be the night shift supervisor for the FBI, one of the most powerful guys up there, and he reviewed the document. He said, oh, no, he wrote like a 6-page affidavit certifying the document was accurate. And he seriously doubted it could be phony and told them how they could check and see.
Okay, but what does Trenadu have to do with the Oklahoma City bombing?
Well, his brother was murdered, tortured and murdered in Oklahoma City at the Federal Transfer Center in August of 1995.
Oh, pardon me, at the Federal Transfer Center?
Brand new one, yeah.
Okay, so he was in police custody. Do we know who murdered him?
Well, my guess, this is just a guess, is that he was being tortured by FBI agents to give up information as to, they felt like he was involved with the Aryan Republican Army. And
whatever gave them that impression?
Well, he had the bad misfortune of coming out of Mexico 6 months after the bombing in a pickup truck that was the description of someone that was often seen with McVeigh for a couple of years before the bombing. He fit perfectly the description of an individual that was often seen with McVeigh in Arizona, Kansas, and Oklahoma City. He has a tattoo that is extremely unusual that precisely matches the description of a tattoo that several people in Kansas and Missouri saw the guy have that was with McVeigh in the days leading up to the bombing. And he had a history of robbing banks, and that was the final blow. So
the FBI tortured and murdered him in a case of mistaken identity?
Apparently so.
And so now they've picked a fight with his brother.
McVeigh sent a letter to Trenadu before he was executed, and this is to the older brother, saying the reason why they killed your brother was they thought he fit the description. They thought he looked a lot like Guthrie. They thought they had Guthrie.
Oh, so it was McVeigh that tipped off the older brother?
Yeah.
About what had happened?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And then McVeigh, before he died, provided another friend of mine a list of the people that we should take a look at.
Oh, really? Can you hang out for another half hour, Mr. Cash?
Yeah, we'll do that.
All right. Hey, everybody, we're talking with J.D. Cash. He's a reporter for the McCurtain County Gazette. He deserves about 10 Pulitzers, but he'll never get them. We're talking about the Oklahoma City bombing, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Real Talk Radio, only on the Republic Broadcasting Network. You're tuned in to the National Intel Report, the Real Talk Radio Show.
Hey everybody, I'm Scott Horton, filling in for John Statmiller on the Intel Report on the Republic Broadcasting Network. I'm talking with J.D. Cash from the McCurtain County Gazette. He's been writing for 10 years stuff that you may not know about the Oklahoma City bombing. Now, where we left off was there's a guy named Kenneth Michael Trenadu who was murdered by the FBI. Timothy McVeigh, before his death, sent a letter to this guy's older brother, who happens to be a lawyer, saying, hey, the reason the FBI murdered your brother is because they thought he was this other guy, Richard Guthrie. Mm-hmm. So now Jesse Trenadu has gone before a Utah judge, and I believe as you wrote in the McCurtain Daily Gazette, sir, this Utah judge isn't really impressed by DOJ folk from Washington, D.C. Is that right?
Well, he thinks they're all liars. The judge is not going along with what he's seeing from the Department of Justice. This is what's so important is Jesse has this FOIA. He's suing the Oklahoma City FBI office in Salt Lake City. So now there's judges that don't have they don't have a dog in the fight. They're not corrupted by the Oklahoma City FBI, the Oklahoma City political machine. And so he's getting the law. He's getting the law that he deserves. And the judge is saying, I want this crap turned over.
And so this has basically just stirred up the whole pot. Now you got guys at the DOJ who are saying, look, I'm sick and tired of this. I'm going to go ahead and leak some documents to JB Cash.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, now there it is. Get out in front of it because they're partially responsible themselves.
What they're trying to tell me is you got to understand we would have caught these guys had the ATF not bungled it. So there's a motive for them to talk to me. And the statute of limitations on everything but murder has run. So they're just now trying to get me to understand that they really did have this handled, and they just couldn't keep the ATF out of it. And I'm not so sure that that's not just exactly right.
That very well may be the case, but even if it is...
they should be telling us this long ago.
Yes, long ago. I mean, this is the biggest cover-up since, I don't know, Pearl Harbor?
Kennedy.
Yeah, I mean, this is the ATF, the FBI, the Department of Justice, all the local authorities.
Don't forget the Secret Service either. They're involved in this stinking mess.
Oh, and how's that?
Well, for one thing, they knew that Peter Langen, who was a major figure in this, in the bombing and in the ARA bank robbery deal, they knew that he was going to bomb a building, a federal building, and commit mass genocide as soon as he got out of jail. Because he'd told an FBI informant who was a former cop who shot his girlfriend, is in jail, so he's still working for the system. And he's feeding information, so they stuck him next to Langen, and he sucks up to Langen. Next thing you know, I've got the 302, I've got the report of investigation. So what do? The Secret Service wants Guthrie so bad, because they think Guthrie's going to start the Third World War, kill all the presidents, the Supreme Court. I mean, just God almighty, I don't know why. They wanted him the worst way. So they go and get Langen and say, look, you want to get out of jail. He's looking at 22 years for, another, he's like a 3-time loser. And he says, well, sure, what do I have to do? And they said, well, just go rat out Guthrie for us. He goes, well, sure. So they put him on the street. So what does he do? He double crosses them. He goes and tells Guthrie, because he's scared to death of Guthrie. Mm-hmm. He says, they've hired me to bust you. And he said, let's get out of town and start robbing banks and overthrow the government. Guthrie says, fine with me. I'm not so sure about Guthrie. It's clear to me that the FBI knew that Guthrie and Langen were in town where they were in robbing banks. And yet, when the local police would go see him, or the Secret Service would rat him out, they'd say, we don't, we're busy. We're playing pinochle. I've got a cop that we can put on the air for you sometime who will tell you, he was working intel in Cincinnati. He will tell you that he made more than one trip to the FBI saying, you can get them today. Right now, I know where they're sitting there drinking beer. And they said, blow it off. Don't worry about it. These are bank robbers. Didn't the FBI used to work bank robbery cases?
Yeah, I thought that's how they got the police power.
That Guthrie was being protected by the FBI. So people that are listening are going, well, this madman that's talking is on the radio thinks the FBI had a bank robbery team out there. Well, I think they did.
Afraid so. I saw on Court TV a few years back, on Court TV, they were covering the trial of Shane and Chevy Kehoe. And if everybody in the audience will put on your thinking cap, we have all, like 99% of us, have seen the footage on Cops, where it's the dashboard camera from a state trooper in Michigan, I think.
Ohio.
Ohio. And it's a big blue and white Suburban pulled over on the side of the road, and there's a point-blank shootout with these cops, and nobody gets shot.
Nobody hits anything.
Right. And I think we've all seen this footage a million times. If everybody, squeeze your eyeballs closed together tight and imagine that Suburban pulled over on the side of the road. You've seen the footage. That Shane and Chevy Kehoe, the neo-Nazi bank robbers, and on Court TV, they said, in fact, I believe this was testimony at Shane Kehoe's trial, that on the morning of the Oklahoma bombing, he showed up at the local motel at 6 o'clock in the morning and said, turn it to CNN, something big's going to happen, and waited around all morning, and then when it finally happened, he jumped up and down, clapping his hands, and was very happy. And this is testimony in a federal courtroom, and everybody goes, okay, great, whatever.
Oh, I could tell you long stories about those kids. Shane was a guard at a number of times when I went to Elham City. He was the guard.
Oh, really?
He had already killed the Mueller family and Shane would not come into the church when I was there. He would stay in his travel trailer with his girlfriend, his little black Labrador, and I never could quite figure out who these kids were. They were members of the ARA, and they were just cold-blooded killers. They were not needed for the bombing. They had other purposes, mainly just small-time. They deal in crack and meth. They travel around the country and rob people. If you needed somebody killed, they would take care of that. They were great at going to gun shows and finding old gun dealers and then breaking into their house and stealing their stuff. So, and they'd fence for stolen property, things like that. And naturally, they would, when the heat was on, they would hang out at Elohim City. And I ask people to please understand, or try to understand, that we need to go to our congressman and order an investigation into this. If nothing else, they can take the leadership of Elohim City, which are all a bunch of child molesters anyway, and put them in jail for the crimes they committed for harboring fugitives for years.
Is that place still open for business?
It is still open. The state of Oklahoma, a couple of years ago, was running ads telling people they ought to try to buy lumber from their sawmill. I mean, this is the most bizarre thing. Of course, they're all informants over there.
Now, see, here's really the crux of the thing here. Okay, when I was younger and more willing to jump to conclusions, I just looked at the Oklahoma bombing and said, okay, well, the government did it so that they could play victim, because we all know that in American society, victim and hero are interchangeable concepts. And, I basically backed off that conclusion and thought, well, for one reason or another, they covered it up. Maybe they really just screwed it up and they didn't want to admit how bad they had screwed it up and that kind of thing. But
that's where I am right now.
I sort of feel like I'm headed back toward the government did this thing on purpose. I mean, you talk about the ATF had an informant in here and was trying to do the bust, but it sounds to me like the ATF had infiltrated a ring of FBI agents. I mean, if all of these neo-Nazis were working for the cops, was anybody just a regular terrorist Nazi?
Okay, that's where I am now, is trying to figure out, okay, who is a legitimate Nazi? Who is not working for the government? McVeigh told his sister, once he joined the ARA, that he was really working for a branch, he was a cutout for military intelligence.
Right.
And I have the letter to his sister. He may believe that. He may have been.
Well, and we know the official story is that he washed out of Special Forces, and that was the last he ever saw of the Army.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. But
now, they also said there's two sets of records, military records, for Richard Guthrie. One was that they drummed him out of the military because he was a Nazi and a mess. Then there is the true set, which my good partner, who's a lieutenant colonel, graduate of the Naval Academy, who's an expert on military records, he goes and gets the real records. And what it shows is that Mr. Guthrie graduated from the SEAL program, then was assigned to the Admiral's flagship in the Mediterranean. Then he served 7 years, was discharged, possibly discharged. It shows a discharge on his military records. He then went to 2 flight schools, one in Florida at Daytona Beach, the Autry Embry, the Embry-Riddle flight school there. Then he goes to the one in Phoenix. Now, I want you to know, these are the places you go to fly jets, to get certified to fly airlines, become an airline pilot. This is extremely expensive, and this man is not working. So who do you think he's working for? He is working on the dark side for someone. And obviously,
well, those flight school names sound familiar too.
Well, the Arabs went to them too. That's it. See, if you have a lot of money, that's where you go. And in fact, those guys that did 9/11 went to the Daytona Beach Embry-Riddle Flight School. You're exactly right, Scott. Mm. So you have their favorite thing. Of course, you know that 2 of the 9/11 guys were living with an FBI informant at the time of the bombing.
Yeah, in San Diego.
I know that must be very embarrassing to the Bureau.
Well, there's this guy, David Holloway, was a former Green Beret and a CIA pilot, and you're saying he was buddies with Kirk Lyons, and you already think that Kirk Lyons was really working for Morris Dees over at the
SPLC.
Yeah.
Now, listen, also, by just a lovely luck, perfect luck, when we get this January 4th, 96 teletypes talking about Morris Dees' informants at Elohim City monitoring this thing, I'm just about to come unglued. This is 03 when I get this. And so my publisher calls me one weekend and says, you know, you really are the luckiest human being on earth. I said, what's happened? He said, Dees is going to be at Southeastern State University, which is 50 miles from our office, on Monday. So we go over there, and, of course, they always have these little local media outlets asking these, you know, they fawn over Morris Dees like he's the second coming. And so we let these little girls ask their questions and so forth. And then, of course, we're rolling tape. You know, they've got their cameras there and everything. So we're taking pictures and rolling tape, and we say, okay, now we want to talk about your informant operation at Elohim City. And we have obtained a copy of a Louis Freeh, and he's just about to die. And he said, do you have it with you? And I said, no, obviously I don't, because I don't want to share it with you. Not at this time. I just want to ask you some questions. He goes, how did you get it? And I just looked at him. He said, you got it from a FOIA. And he's sitting there thinking, how could they be so stupid? And I said, well, let's just talk about it. I said, number one, why were you there? And he said, well, we were there, but I'm not, if I had to tell you, I'd kill you first before I would tell you. And, he made some other...
Oh, Morris Dees said a violent threat like that?
Yes, he did.
I'm so surprised.
Well, he had his guards with him, too. Well, he gave us about 5 minutes worth of juicy stuff, and then he got up to leave. And while he's walking away, I walked up to him, because I'm thinking it's Strassmeyer, that it was his principal informant. And I walked up to him and I said, well, now that you've had years to think about this, what do you think of Andy Strassmeyer now? He gave me the coldest go-to-hell look that I've had in a long time. And he said, I'm not going to talk about that man. I will never talk about him. And he turned and just walked out. And I told Bruce, I said, I'll be damned. I think that we've got something here. And but I think it's Holloway. I think that Holloway was his boy, and I think that Holloway was also using Strassmeyer. They had been roommates before the bombing and after the bombing. They busted some guys for the ATF in Texas, and a group called the Texas Light Infantry in 1993. This was another Kirk Lyons thing that he set up. Lewis Beam was involved, and Holloway was Lewis Beam's partner in the computer business in Austin. They had Andy working there.
Oh, Andre Strassmeyer lived here in Austin for a while, huh?
Yes, he did.
Oh, I didn't even know.
Yeah, you remember back in the 90s when Lewis Beam was in business there, in the computer business in Austin. His employees were Holloway and Strassmeyer.
Nice.
What a small world.
Yeah, small world indeed.
You know, your host, John Stadtmiller, and I go way back.
Oh, is that so?
Has he ever told you that he went to Elohim City right after the bombing?
No, he hasn't told me that.
He can correct my... I need to call John and ask him, can we catch up on some old stuff?
Well, I know he was pleased when I told him you were going to be my guest today.
Yeah, and I think John knows some stuff that he's probably has never shared with anybody. Because I think he's really quite a guy.
Oh,
so
well.
I hope he is on the mend. I didn't know he'd had a wreck.
Yeah, he wrecked his motorcycle, but he's doing okay.
He's too old to be playing with those. I sold mine about 5 years ago.
Well, I hope
Tell him he's
listening.
just too darn old to be playing with those things.
All right, now I got to ask you about Lori Milroy over at the American Enterprise Institute.
I barely know her.
Okay, so
I know she loves to. She sees an arrow behind every tree.
Well, and not only that, she's got this whole thing where Youssef is not Youssef, the Pakistani raised in Kuwait, but Youssef is a secret Iraqi agent who killed a Kuwaiti and is pretending to be him. And
it could be. I know that it's pretty dark over there. You don't know what's going on.
Well, the thing is,
there's
really,
no birth records, no fingerprint stuff.
Well, and see, here's the thing. We already kind of skipped over. I mean, if I believe it's your understanding that Youssef doesn't even have anything to do with this anyway. So
no,
even if he was an Iraqi, that still wouldn't matter.
Yeah, that doesn't matter. He's not a white guy. And you won't see any dark people at all at Elohim City. And let me assure everybody here, I've spent enough time in Aryan Nations and Elohim City. I've been to all the camps in this country, and I have never seen a person of color in any of them.
Well, but you wouldn't, I mean, the story doesn't have Yusef and his crew at Elohim City. They have Terry Nichols in the Philippines.
Yeah. And let me tell you, you know what they do with people from Kansas and the Philippines and down in the southern islands where the Moro Indians are?
What do?
They eat them. They cook them and eat them.
They don't train them in bomb-making school?
No. Well, they have a very long and recent history. You remember the couple that went over there to try to civilize them?
Oh, yeah.
And the local, what's the name of the thugs down there that James is so hot on?
Abu Sayyaf.
Yeah, Abu Sayyaf. They got a hold of those people and they cooked them and ate them.
Oh, nice. Well, I'm trying to remember. I know. Abdul Hakim Murad, who was one of Ramzi Yousef's sidekicks in the Philippines. When Ramzi Yousef's, they were cooking some bombs and it caught on fire. Yousef escaped, but Wali Khan, Amin Shah, and Abdul Hakim Murad were captured and turned over to the U.S., and Murad, at least, I'm not saying that this is necessarily legitimate, but he claimed credit for the Oklahoma bombing the day it happened from his New York City jail cell.
Well, I'm afraid he's just probably talking about another building.
All right, well, we'll be right back after this break. It's the Intel Report on the Republic Broadcasting Network. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Intel Report. John Statmiller's show. I'm Scott Horton filling in for him. I'm the host of the Weekend Interview Show. I'll be on tomorrow, like every Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m. I keep all my archives at weekendinterviewshow.com. I'm talking with J.D. Cash, and J.D., John Statmiller just called in and said he's never been to Elohim City, and he might have talked to you on the phone one time, but he don't know you that well. So.
I thought in the back of my mind that he went down there to kind of look around and see what was going on right after the bombing.
Huh, well, that might have been, maybe we're confusing people.
Did he have, tell John to send me an email. You've got my email.
I sure do.
And I'll see if I can try to remember why it is I know him.
Okay.
I may have been mixed up with a different guy.
Well, I'm sure he's probably interviewed you a couple of times in the last 10 years.
Could be.
Because I know
I would also like to tell people that of all the hosts radio hosts that I've been interviewed by over the years, you have done the most research into this crime of any of them that I have spoken with. And so I think that your audience is very fortunate to have you. You're someone who takes this stuff very serious, and you do know some of the most incredible details. And that's great.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for saying so. I sure appreciate that. And speaking of research, Dana Rohrabacher recently went and talked to Terry Nichols in his cell and came out kind of disappointed. Doesn't seem like he learned too much.
You know, Dana's a very crafty fellow. And I told Roger Charles, I said, Dana picked up a couple of things that were very important. The most important was that he told me was that Nichols admitted that he had made this trip to Elohim City with McVeigh at a time that I knew he was in the area. And so this was huge. And even the poor old Daily Oklahoman had to, after we reported it, they called him, he verified it, and so on. Dana has called me 3 times in the last, earlier this week, within a 36-hour period, and we talked for about an hour each time. He is either in Germany or on his way to Germany right now, and he is hot on this stuff. I think that this guy is a good guy. I think that he's trying to do the right thing, and I'm very impressed with him as an individual, a person of backbone. He's a great story. If you don't know anything about Congressman Rohrabacher, he's cut from a different cloth. He worked in the Reagan White House. He was a speechwriter there. Now, listen to this, Scott. A lot of people don't know this, but that crazy guy went to Afghanistan and fought with the Northern Alliance and fought the Russians while he was working for Reagan as a speechwriter. I have seen pictures of him with those guys.
Oh, they're fighting with the Mujahideen, huh?
Yes. Now, can you believe this stuff? Now, one day he said that they were riding on their jackasses and they were passing a camp, and the guy said, "For God's sakes, don't say a word. Don't let anybody know you're an American." That lunatic down there is a Saudi, comes from a rich Saudi family, and if he finds out that we're traveling with an American, he'll kill all of us. And it was Bin Laden's camp.
Yeah, that's the split between the Arab Afghans and the Afghans during that war there.
And so, Rohrbacher loves the thrill of the hunt, and he's hunting right now.
And he could be a very powerful ally on this case.
He could be our next vice president, too. Don't forget the possibility that he needs something like this to elevate him on a national scale.
Well, let's hope he can use it. Everybody go to McCurtain.com. That's McCurtain.com.
Yeah.
And read J.D. Cash. He's the reporter from the McCurtain Daily Gazette. He's been writing about Oklahoma City bombing for 10 years. And
there's a handful of stories there. That's a new website. We're just getting it up and working with it. It's far from perfect. It's certainly not the New York Times because we're not the New York Times.
Yeah, well, and thank God for that because they wouldn't touch this story with a 10-foot pole.
Oh, no, they won't. They backed out of this thing years ago.
All right. Hey, let me ask you real quick. What do you think of Jasper's work on this story in the New American Magazine?
I think the world of Bill. I've met with him on a dozen occasions.